Dear friends, I want to remind you, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Today we'll have lesson Rook endings, pawn on the 7th rank. In Tata Masters, in round 5, I was played this game Sindarf against Erdoğmuş, and on 62nd move, Black played Rook d1, but better was King e7. If King Rook a7, King f8, f6, exchange, and Rook takes f4 with equal position. But Black played Rook d1. See what happened in this game. And at the end, Jawahir Sindarf exploited this typical win, f6. Black captured with pawn. Of course, cannot capture with king because check, then white promotes pawn to queen. So after g takes f6, Rook h8, Black resigned. And after watching this game, I decided to show some examples on this topic. This game was played in Moscow in 1993. Yevelev is white, and the Mikliaeva is black. They had 10, 11 years. So very good example. When I'm giving this position to students, I'm telling Black to play in the draw. If they play wrongly, like Mikliaeva in the game, white played King c5. So Black made mistake, Rook a5. Then King b6 underdone. So without moving chess piece, can change question. So in starting position, so if it was Black stand after King c5, Rook a5 check was mistake. Instead of Rook a5, Black has draw. Just transfer your king over f6 to g7. And if king stands on g7 or e7, this theoretical draw position. But on first move, white made mistake also. White wins playing g5. So preventing king's transfer to g7. And Black is, if Black is waiting, for example, white plays f5. Pawn takes, then g6. After takes, Rook h8. This is Q1 method again. White wins. If after f5, if Black is waiting, white takes. If takes, Rook h8 again, If Rook a1, then can push pawn to g7. This win in all variations. So the c5 is good plan. Then we have f1, then g6. And then next, for examples, stronger side is creating very interesting checkmate possibilities, checkmate positions. So here, if Black stand, it was Black stand after h6. If Black would play rightly, white cannot do anything. But Black made mistake, Rook a6. Now white plays now a6. Of course, cannot play Rook a6. Rook b8, Rook z, any moves winning, but here white can checkmate in 4 moves, promoting pawn to queen, or queen f6 checkmate also. After h6, king takes. Now, again, must be very careful. You cannot play king f7 because after king f7, Rook a7 is stalemate. But when you move, king f8, not giving chance. Then king comes to h8, and now Rook moves to all any moves winning. Rook b8, Rook c, d8, e8, f8, any moves winning because Black cannot take. Rook c6 checkmate. This game was played in Moscow in 1955. The Sitchin is white and Stalyar is black. So white played d4. After dx e4, Rook f8. Very nice checkmate. Almost the same idea. This study position. So white played f4. Takes then Rook c8. If Rook takes b7, e5 checkmate. if check and if black is giving his rook, this is a winning position for white. This game was played in 2025 in World Junior Championship, and the Xiao Tong is white, and the Homadov is black. I think here white found already winning possibility, checkmate possibility after 6 moves. So he's following his plan. King d3, also very interesting idea. King comes to d6, and after rook a3, black is waiting. Now white plays rook c8, and the black resigned because if rook takes a7, rook c5, checkmate. And the next two positions of understanding. Black just now captured on g3, white pawn, and now white stand how to take this pawn, with king or with pawn. Or some say they're taking or with pawn, they say, I won't have connected pawns. But his take g3 is mistake here, because black sacrifices his last pawn, and this position is draw. Despite 3 extra pawns, white cannot push the black king from g7 and h7 squares. So this draw. Winning moves on first move, take with king. After king h7, black is just waiting. Now h4, takes king h3, and then push pawn. Black cannot do anything. This winning move. If king f7, rook h8, if king f6, rook f8, white wins. Almost same idea, so white plays. So black plays g6, now white sacrificing h1, f5. But now must be very careful here. Black is setting up trap. Now cannot push pawn because black takes with check, and then rook comes back to a6. This position draw. But instead of f6, king e2 is winning. Now black cannot do anything. And the next two examples are about the typical mistakes. Usually we are teaching if king on f7 or e7 can play rook h8 and are using the skewer method wins. But this exceptional case, if white wood king will stand on g3 on g1 square, this is absolutely winning position, yes. White can play rook h8. But here, this game was played in Helsinki in Finland in 1959. Ojanen is white, and the Radipa is black. And the white played as usual, but it was big mistake here. Black is checking from behind, capturing pawn, and the winning then rook comes to a8 and capturing a7 pawn also. And the next example was played in friendly match Soviet Union Yugoslavia between two grandmasters. Palgaevsky is white and Bruno Parma is black. And a very interesting position when white played a6, grandmaster Parma resigned, thinking that his position is losing. Of course, now black cannot play king g8. They're losing for black because a6, if takes rook b7, then a7, the next move is rook b8, white wins. But after a6, Parma, he had draw rook a4, if check, king f7, a7, rook a1, and then if a6, no need to take on a6, because of course losing if takes, then rook h8 again. But just play king g6, and this position is draw. So dear friends, hope lesson made good impression on you. And please don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Good luck and see you in next lessons.